Hello and welcome to the Max Revenue Show. I'm your host, Trey Shields. The Zen Master of Commercial Insurance could not be here today. He is busy putting out fires in the office, so it's just going to be me today. Which I needed Micah because Micah is actually actively in the contractor trenches, and so he can ask a lot better questions than I can. But he can't make it. So this is truly going to be I'm figuring it out as I go. So we're just going to make it work. But today with us, we have Miss Tanya Andolsen of Argosy Risk, and we're going to do kind of all things environmental and pollution. So without further ado, Tanya, glad you're here. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Trey. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so like I said, I don't know squat about environmental or pollution, very little compared to most of our listeners. So I guess kind of from the jump, my first question is environmental pollution, like the claims are so big when they do happen. So why are they typically, why is it so cheap to buy?
That's a good question. Well, so let me take a step back. So I've been doing environmental insurance for almost 30 years now. From the carrier perspective, from the retail broker side, and now most recently as a wholesale broker, kind of connecting the carriers and the retail brokers.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started 30 years ago, I was with AIG. That was the belief, was that claims were large and infrequent, right? And over the last 30 years, what's happened is the claims are becoming more and more frequent and a lot less, uh, you know, smaller claims, I guess, more frequent and smaller. And the reason is because the carriers' coverages and the coverage forms have become so broad, right? So now you're picking up things like mold, indoor air quality, and environmental insurance is becoming more of a common purchase. It's not just the hazardous waste haulers, it's not just the landfills or the chemical manufacturers. I mean, you're seeing insureds in every industry purchase environmental insurance as part of their normal renewal cycle. So your question, if they're big claims, why are premiums going down? The reason premiums have gone down over the years is because you now have a set or a group of very knowledgeable underwriters, right? So you have underwriters that know how to look at an account, how to price it, what kind of coverages they can afford, um, what kind of limits can be put in place, what kind of deductibles. So you've just got a lot of very educated underwriters who know how to price and underwrite a risk. And with that said, they also know what type of risks can be the ones that are less expensive. We contractors are buying insurance, environmental insurance more and more and more. I mean, and I don't mean remediation contractors. I don't mean, your heavy environmental contractors. I'm talking about, HVAC contractors, roofing, flooring, plumbing. Your standard trades are buying environmental insurance because A, it's affordable. B, it's now becoming more required as part of contracts with larger companies, right? They can't set foot onto a job site without environmental coverage in place. It's becoming a part of standard contract requirements when bidding jobs. So I'm seeing a lot of requests from standard contractors. And so the carriers are able to take a look at what that contractor is doing, what type of a job it is, how long of a job it is, how big of a job it is, and they're able to price it accordingly based on experience, based on loss history. There are a lot of factors that go into it, but we're finding that the underwriting market knows what they're doing.
Got it. Okay. What are some common mistakes that you see producers make when they're not necessarily working through a wholesaler, but just trying to get the coverage that their client needs? Is there kind of some basic missteps that producers make, or some common mistakes you see?
One of the biggest mistakes when it comes to environmental coverage is not bringing it up because they're scared that they're gonna get asked something that they can't answer, right? There are so many resources and I'm not just talking about wholesalers that specialize, I'm talking about carrier contacts that know what they're doing. You have a lot of information that's easily accessible in the underwriting market relative to environmental risks. But one of the biggest mistakes that I see in over my years of doing this, again, on the carrier side, retail side, is not bringing up environmental risk and then jeopardizing a relationship because you have another broker that comes in and that's how they open the door, right? They open the door with environmental. And then you create this uncertainty with your insured where they think, wow, why didn't, my current broker bring this up? Why didn't my current agent bring this up? Why didn't he at least, or he or she at least say, this is something that we need to address that's not covered in a standard property casualty program? That's the biggest mistake, is not bringing it up and not addressing it, not only from, exposure standpoint, but straightforward from an E&O perspective, right? You're not bringing up a coverage that is clearly not covered in the majority of their standard casualty programs. So, if you don't bring it up, you're leaving it uncovered.
Explain to me, like, give me a 101 on environmental insurance. Like, where's the standard coverages, standard coverage forms kind of end, and where does environmental pick up and move forward? Sorry to interrupt the pod, guys, but we got to do them ad reads because they pay the bills. First sponsor, Insurance X Date. Generate leads, win new biz. Insurance X Date is where new business begins. Industry relevant data delivered on a software platform built for sales, not research. Identify and engage with prospects in minutes. Keep track of your opportunities and get production done. We've got a link in the show notes. Go try it out. We got a free trial for you. Whether you're an EB guy or a PNC guy, it's definitely worth your time. Go check it out. They got all the data you need. Big shout out to Rob and the boys over there. Appreciate y'all. All right, back to the show.
Sure. Absolutely. That's probably, I could talk about environmental insurance all day long, but so I like to look at environmental insurance in certain towers or buckets or just standard ways to look at where the exposures would exist. So if I went into an insured, this is how I would help uncover where they could potentially have liabilities. So the first is going to be from a site specific perspective, right? So are they doing it anything from an owned, a leased, an operated site, right? That the insured has? It doesn't have to be something they own, whether they lease it, they operate it. Is there something that's going on that property that could potentially cause an environmental issue? So is it from operations, from manufacturing? Is it from storage? Is it from waste disposal, right? So those type of things, if you have a situation at the site and there it causes something to, be dispersed into the air, into the water, into the groundwater. You have a tank that leaks. You have some smells that are coming from your facility that your neighbors don't like. Those are all things that are not going to be covered by your property or by your general liability policy. So that third party bodily injury, property damage exposure, right? Are you affecting someone that you don't realize it? Then on site, right? So what are you doing on site that could cause an environmental issue? And I'm not talking about employees. So environmental coverage is not going to cover like a work comp type of exposure. It's for third party. So any third parties that come onto the site. So, has anything spilled or emanated? Do you have something on your site that needs to be addressed? Now, a lot of insureds feel that, well, they've got everything under control on site, right? I've got good safeguards in place, great employees, everything's clean, well taken care of, and that's great. It's that third party, that offsite that you have no control over, right? Is something coming off your property that you don't know about? Does your neighbor, are they not comfortable with what's happening? Are you close to a neighborhood? Are you close to schools, waterways, streams? Those are all, that's a site specific exposure. So you always think of something that's on, at, under, or emanating from. Now, also with the excite, there's the unknown, right? What if you start operating a site that you acquire or that you've had for years and you go to do an expansion or development or some capital improvements and you find something in the soil that was there from a previous user? That's, an unknown pre-existing condition. Now, you may think, well, oh, well, that's not going to be my problem because it's clearly from someone who operated there before me. Well, the way environmental liability works is if you're in the chain of title, it's on you, right? It's on you. Chances are you you're going to be the one that's hit with having to clean it up, even if it's something that's coming from a neighboring location through your location, but you go start digging and you find it. Um, it's going to be on you until you can prove that the source is not you or it's coming from another location, or if you as part of the acquisition of that property accepted it as is, right? You bought it, you didn't nothing in the purchase agreement talks about potential environmental liabilities. You've got no indemnity from the seller. Actually, the seller may not even exist anymore, right? So that's on you. So may seem unfair. It's strict, it's strict liability. And you could be held liable for a cleanup if you've got a regulatory agency that comes in and says you need to clean something up. So that's my site. That's my, again, I could talk about it all day long, but that's the thing. So whether it's one property, 5 properties, 50 properties, I've got entire real estate portfolios that look for coverage for all their locations because they want to make sure that if something happens, if someone claims that they're not comfortable with what's going on at the location, and I'm even talking about, real estate like a chain of hotels, a chain of restaurants, a chain of healthcare facilities. There's a lot of different exposures that real estate portfolio owners want to make sure they've got the coverage and the defense costs in place if there's an issue. So that's your property. Um, Flipping over to the other type of coverage, thinking about a contractor. So let's think about someone that's going to go or send employees or subs on their behalf to a job site, to a customer location. Are they doing contracting work? Are they doing maintenance work? Are they, doing excavation work? Any type of work that I'm a contractor, I'm going to someone else's location. What if, because of my work, I either cause or exacerbate an environmental condition that's at a customer location? So that's your contractor's pollution liability. And keep in mind, like I said, it doesn't even talk about cause, it talks about exacerbating, right? What if I go in and I start doing some development or some renovations and I uncover asbestos, I uncover mold, I uncover lead-based paint. I go to do some digging and there's contamination in the ground, and because of my digging, it spreads the contamination. So you've got your contractor's pollution liability. Uh, I have contractors that come to me and look for coverage just for jobs. I have them coming to me looking for coverage for all of their operations. There's different ways you can look at it, but that's a very common insurance that's purchased now is contractors pollution liability. Uh, Along with that, I just always like to throw in that you also could potentially have your E&O there, right? So what if your contractor also is a consultant and they do, as part of their work or their maintenance or they give some type of a recommendation. So they have a professional service there. And they tell you, you know what, Trey, you need to dig or you need to fix this or set this up just like this. And you rely on my recommendation. And because of my recommendation, there's a pollution incident or something happens. You've got that E&O exposure there. And a lot of the contractors' pollution liability policies can include an E&O coverage component there. If it's, now we're not talking design build, we're not talking, a real majority of E&O type of exposure. We're talking about a contractor that's got, some consulting as part of their operations. So those are the two main towers, right? Is it a site or is it a contracting operation, right? I kind of like to look at it from those perspective because neither of those you're not going to find coverage in your casualty, whether it's on your general liability or property. You might have some type of a sublimit for debris removal in property, but it's not nearly what would be needed if there was truly an environmental incident. There's a couple other, I'm just going to bring these up real quickly, a couple other coverage components
Sure.
that are usually included as part of a contractor's pollution or a site pollution policy, but they would be associated with transportation pollution. right? Okay, so whether it's me using my vehicles to transport something or me calling up ABC Trucking to pick something up and remove it from my location or remove it from a job site. Is it products? Is it waste? If something happens in transit as that's going to a facility or going to a recycling center or going to a landfill, if there's an upset overturn, um, that could be on me because I am, either the producer of the waste or the producer of the product. So you've got your transportation pollution liability. Some auto liability policies have a CA 9948, which is the transportation pollution extension. Um, and that can cover in transit for owned vehicles. Typically doesn't include loading and unloading, doesn't include third parties. It's a minimal coverage there, but if you have that exposure, you can get the transportation pollution liability included on a actual separate policy form.
Yeah, I did a lot of trucking, towing, sand and gravel, some hazmat, and I never saw it.
Yeah. Every now and then it comes up, but I wouldn't rely on it when you can get better coverage in the environmental market. Um
So
Another
let
one.
me ask you this real quick.
Sure, sure.
Just
No,
real quick.
that's
I want you to carry this episode because I don't know this, so I feel free to talk away.
You've got the
But
right
my
person because I could, like I said, I could talk all day. You said two things when we first talked. You said I want you to be interesting, and I want you to share your secret sauce. And I can be both because I've been doing this a long time and I'm passionate about it. But I think that there's definitely a lack of education. And I love to share this with producers, with
yeah,
salespeople, because there's a need for more people to understand it. There's a need for more people to
totally.
sell it. I mean, whether it's a niche or whether it's just rounding out existing accounts to strengthen your relationship with them.
Well, I mean, as the market softens, right? I mean, that's going to be one of the things that producers need to do is, round out accounts, add where you can. Not that we don't want to sell nothing, but it's the commissions are going to be going down. So anything we can do to offset that and also help our clients. So my question was real quick in the trucking space. I never saw that. I never bought it for any of my clients or even brought it up. Do you feel like the transportation like in transit is a big open, I guess, like is that just a big gap where most people just don't see and like more people who focus on trucking should be looking into that, or is there just not a lot of risk there? Because I mean, I feel like at least once or twice a year, one of my clients had a big, turnover, and all it takes is like, a that diesel to leak out. And the next thing you know, it's in a stream, and then it goes whatever. I mean, so, but I never placed it, and I never saw any of my colleagues place it. Is that what do you think? Interrupting the podcast to tell you about your new favorite wholesaler, Element 22. We've officially partnered with Element 22 to be the max revenue preferred wholesaler. You heard that right. We've vetted them out. We've talked with them. We've looked at their smorgasbord of products and offerings, and they're legit. Check them out. If you've got deals or current clients that need a creative PNC solution, give them a shot. You can send your submission straight to our inbox, which is maxrevenue at element22ins.com, or you can call Brian directly at 843-296-3376 and tell him Max Revenue sent you. Seriously, if you're not married to your current wholesaler and you want to test somebody else out, and see what real service and real execution looks like, call the boys over at Element 22. Can't thank you enough to those guys. All right, back to the podcast.
It's becoming more of a concern. A lot more often than not, I see it combined with pollution liability programs, so not on a monoline transportation pollution liability, right? I do work with an agency that has a lot of trucking companies, a lot of transportation risks, and they do, whether it's a contract requirement, but they do consider and put the pollution liability in place for that upset overturn, that loading and unloading. I think that there's, a thought that, so you're looking at it from the trucker's perspective, the actual transporter's perspective. I'm also looking at it from the generator's perspective, right? There's a couple ways you can look at it. So the trucking company may feel like, well, you know what? We know what we're doing. We're a trucking company, right? We're going from point A to point B and nothing bad's going to happen. Um, so that may be why you didn't see a lot of the trucking companies purchase it, because it was not being required. But if I'm a generator and I'm having a trucking company transport my product or my waste, I have to think, okay, well, how does my contract read with them? When that leaves my facility, is it on me or is it on them? Rarely are you going to find in contracts, and I'm not just talking about transportation contracts. I'm talking about lease agreements, purchase and sale agreements. And I guess rarely is not the right word, but a lot of times there's a missing component in agreements when it comes to environmental liability. There's nothing in there that specifically says if there's an environmental incident. So it leaves a big, wide open gray area or gap as okay, who's responsible? I'm relying on ABC Trucking. ABC Trucking is saying it's not their product, right? Who's got the responsibility if something happens? If there's a crash, if there's a upset over, if there's a leak. I mean, I've seen things being transported, milk, cranberry juice, animal fat, things that you would not necessarily consider hazardous or toxic, but I've seen them, be involved in an accident, and the cleanup or the natural resource damages have been so large from a claim perspective. And then who pays? The transporter or the generator? Uh, or how about the person that arranged for the transportation? Maybe it was neither. Maybe it was a broker that
Hmm.
said, I'm the logistics broker. I'm saying that you need to pick it up here and take it here. All of those parties could be included if there was an environmental incident. It's sometimes it's not clear.
Got it. All right. Sorry to derail you. Going back to your
No,
pillars.
that's okay. Gosh, can derail me. I was just saying, so you've got the two, you've got the transportation. So we just talked about transportation. Another area where there's a gap in coverage, and it's called non-owned disposal sites, right? So you've got something that's going from your facility or from your job site, and it's being taken to a waste facility, right? And so you're relying on the transporter, the waste broker to take it to the right facility. But what happens if at that facility there's a loss or a pollution release, or it's taken to the wrong facility, and that your waste or your product was taken to a facility that's not set up to handle that? You could be brought into a lawsuit as the generator of that, and it's referred to as PRP, potentially responsible party liability. I'm working with an account right now that they were tagged from some waste disposal that from 1985 at a facility now that's having some environmental issues. It's old, it needs to be remediated. They're tagging everyone that has ever disposed of any waste at that facility, and looking for who has money in their pockets and who's still in business, right? So whether you transported or whether you disposed of, 2 cups of waste and I disposed of, 10, 50 gallons of waste, we're both going to be brought in, to determine, who's going to be responsible for cleaning it up and who is going to foot the bill. So that's called, your non-owned disposal sites. Again, outside of your control, but a lot of companies think, oh, that's left my site. ABC Trucking's taking it. It's going somewhere. It's out of sight, out of mind, right? So a lot of times you think once it's gone, you're off the hook, but that's not the case in environmental. You can be pulled in as a potentially responsible party. So again, that non-owned disposal site coverage, it can be included, and most of the times it is included as a component of a site pollution policy or of a contractor's pollution policy. Um, Years ago, when I was in on the underwriting side, a lot of times it was a menu driven format where you choose, do I need site coverage? Do I need contracting coverage? Do I need transportation? Now what you see with most of the carriers is that those coverages are all included. And there's not necessarily premium discount to take them out, because it's one of those things where, you know what, we're giving you the coverage that you need, and you're not paying umpteen dollars more for all of these. We're underwriting it based on all of these exposures. Uh, Again, non-owned sites. How about non-owned storage facilities, non-owned warehouses? What if you are storing your products someplace and then there's an issue at that storage facility or that warehouse? they're going to come to you and everyone else that has their product there and say, hey, we've got an environmental issue. Something, there was a big storm, everything's leaking, and all of it has, come together. And now we're coming after everyone to clean it up, right? So non-owned location liability, again, that can be offered as part of the pollution liability programs. And a lot of times when I do things like non-owned disposal sites or non-owned locations, it's on a blanket basis. So it's not necessarily like you have to tell me every warehouse or you're storing things at, tell me every non-owned disposal site. There's a way you can get coverage on a blanket basis for those, so that there's not a coverage gap.
Got it.
And okay, one last one last
No, go
area.
ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, these because I'm just hitting the one last area I like to bring up when it comes to environmental is products pollution. And I think this is something that is probably the most overlooked when a producer or an account executive, or someone's working on a renewal. A lot of times you consider products liability, right? That's part of your general liability program, products liability. But what if you've got a total pollution exclusion on that general liability policy or an absolute pollution exclusion? What that does is it removes coverage in the event that the product causes a pollution incident. So whether it's the use of the product, the failure of the product, the misuse of the product, um, it would be considered products pollution. So I'll give you an example. So if you've got a paint or a coating or a glue or a solvent, and that's your product. Again, whether you're a manufacturer or distributor, that's the product that goes out with your name on it. If that causes a pollution incident, so a harm, a bodily injury, or property damage because of the product, and there's a pollution exclusion on that product's liability policy, depending on the jurisdiction and where the claim comes in and how it comes in, it could be excluded as a pollution incident. So you've got a manufacturer, you've got an account executive, a producer thinking, we've got products liability, we're good to go, right? Not realizing that existence of the total pollution exclusion puts a big gap in coverage if the result is actually a pollution incident. I also like to bring up things like buckets, drums, valves, containers. Okay, so you think products liability. And when you think of that, you don't think of pollution, right? But what if your product is being used to store or transport something and your product fails?
What if the valve breaks
What
and
if
you
the
have
valve
yeah,
breaks? And you don't think, well, I'm a I'm a valve manufacturer, I'm a valve distributor. What kind of environmental risk do I have? Well, if your product's being used in a setup that could fail and then cause an environmental incident, your product's pollution coverage would need to be affirmative rather than relying on your product's liability and having a total pollution exclusion. So that is an area of coverage outside of your site pollution and outside of your contractor's pollution that you need to just look at in combination with your product's liability, right? Because you want to, in most cases, you're going to want to make sure that the same carrier that's providing your product's liability is providing your product's pollution, right? Because you don't want it to be a fight between, because it could be a gray area. Was it a liability? So you've got a select number of carriers now in the environmental market that offer combined general liability, pollution, products pollution under the same form. That came out and I'm going to say like in the mid 90s. AIG had a policy called the Eagle, environmental and general liability exposures. Now you've got numerous other carriers that offer similar for certain types of risk so that you can make sure that you've got an affirmative coverage grant for that product's pollution exposure. So it's something that needs to be looked at and addressed. My rule of thumb here when I have an insured that comes to me or a client is to kind of go through all of these areas with them and just kind of talk through them, and just, I help identify where there could be gaps in coverage, where there could be environmental issues. Um, and again, like I said from the very beginning, it's not brought up by many times because there's that uncomfortableness. So I think that, having a checklist that goes through these, just something that you can open the door with your insureds, open the conversation up, put it up on the table and say, look, this is probably something we need to talk about. something that we need to address. We need to make sure that you understand that you don't currently have coverage. It's a good way for producers, new producers, to get their foot in the door, existing producers to round out the coverage that they've got, to make sure that that new producer doesn't come in the door and, bring up environmental coverage. It's just a lot of opportunity.
Do you have a checklist or anything like what you're just talking about? Do you have something that you could send to me that I could put out for the listeners?
Sure, absolutely. I have a nice little checklist that goes through those different areas, just kind of, again, go through where you might have environmental liabilities, and then it helps, again, E&O perspective, rounding out your account. It's a good thing to bring up. You've got a very, very robust underwriting community when it comes to environmental insurance. You've got a lot of access to a lot of resources that can help you discuss these things with an insured. I would tell producers and sales execs and agents not to hesitate to reach out and have an environmental person on the call with the insured. Someone that can answer the calls. Um, that's something I do often because A, I enjoy talking about it, as you can see, but B, I also like to help my, if I'm working with a broker or an agent, I want to help them feel comfortable. I want them to, be able to offer that value add to their insureds. Uh, it's just an important part, and I know that there are, over the years I've seen, Trey, a lot of agents and producers have a real protective relationship there with an insured, right? And they're not comfortable having an underwriter or having a resource talk to their clients. Uh, I would say, don't hesitate to do that. Your insured is gonna end up valuing the relationship more, the more resources you can and experts you can bring to the table.
Totally agree. So you have your typical obvious, your remediation contractors, people that do any type of hazmat, that type of stuff. But what are some other common insureds that you see that maybe should trigger, hey, I need to think environmental on this, but they're not typically thought of that way, but they should be?
Um, I've seen situations where street and road contractors have been pulled into environmental claims, alleging that they improperly graded the road, and because of that, the water flowed towards a building, causing water intrusion, resulting in mold. Okay, so that's
Wow.
something. I mean, you've got the more obvious exposure when it comes to street and road is the asphalt, the stuff that you put the coatings. What if you put it on and it rains and that gets washed off into a stream and a waterway, something outside of your control. So your street and road, roofing contractors, again, not properly installing the roof, resulting in some water intrusion, resulting in mold, or indoor air quality issues. HVAC contractors, is there an issue there with the way they installed the HVAC that spread contaminants through an entire building, right? So indoor air quality issues. Anyone that uses glues or solvents in their process, carpeting, any type of you think of any type of remodeling inside, and it may be a minor exposure, but if you have a lawsuit, that's where the cost can get significant, right? If someone claims that they're sick, or you've ruined their building, or you've ruined, you caused employees because of your improper application of something. The smell or the glues got sucked into the HVAC system, and now everyone in my buildings is sick, something like that. A plumbing contractor. So I had a situation where a plumbing contractor was working on some plumbing lines at a hospital, turned down the temperature of the water, and because of that, there was a Legionella outbreak because they said that the temperature of the water could not get hot enough to kill the germs and the bacteria, causing there to be a Legionella outbreak in a medical facility. So that's, that there's a lot of different areas. Landscaping contractors, you come on with your fertilizers and your application, and what if that there's overspray? I mean, the overspray comes in too with your agricultural operations. Overspray, whether it's by hand, whether it's by uh, airplane, whether it's by drone. I've had several situations where I've had drone application accounts come to me for environmental coverage, wanting to make sure that if they get pulled into a lawsuit because of overspray at a facility, whether it's a co-op or just some agricultural vacant land, that they've got coverage because they're the ones that are applying the product. There's just so many different areas that you don't think of, that could have environmental exposure. The again, the typical argument that I've heard so many times that is that, I don't do anything toxic. I don't work with anything hazardous. You know, I don't have anything environmental in my business. I mean, if you look up the definition of pollutant or the definition of pollution condition, or contamination, it doesn't say anything about it. The majority of the definitions do not have the word hazardous or toxic in them. What they say is something along the lines of a pollutant is something that is introduced to an environment where it's not supposed to be, or it is supposed to be, but the result is harm to that environment. So whether it's harm to the grass, to the soil, to the people in the environment, it's something introduced that, should or should not be there, but because of its introduction into environment, it had an adverse effect. And so that's the big thing, is when looking at different accounts, is understanding that it doesn't have to be hazardous or toxic, especially, in the insurance world. A pollutant is something that shouldn't be there. Or again, when it's introduced or comes into the environment, has an adverse effect.
Yeah, too much. Sometimes it can be too much of a good thing, even if it is there naturally. If it's too much of X, Y, or Z.
Yes.
So one of the things I dealt with personally when I was in production, I'm thinking of an auto dealer, multi-location auto dealer. They also had, body shops, service shops, and so they had fuel tanks and different, obviously large amounts of lubricants and this, that, and the other. And I got into not an argument, but a debate with them about why, pollution was so important. And really all I could come up with to explain it to him was just to bring up some case studies or examples, claim scenarios. What do you feel like, with the producers you see that sell pollution? And I'm not talking about the guys who specialize in it. I'm talking about maybe more your generalists or people who are rounding out accounts. What's a I mean, is it just claim scenarios? Is that kind of the best way to kind of shock them into realizing this is an important thing they should take seriously? What do you find your successful producers do there?
Claim scenarios are definitely helpful. News articles. I have a lot of headlines that I like to share when I'm doing a presentation. Headlines that sound shocking, they sound like they're made up, but they're in, environmental situations. But claim scenarios are you've got, again, a very robust underwriting market and a lot of carriers that do have those type of resources where they can give claim scenarios. Again, that they have either a database, they either have website access on their webpage, they have claim scenarios. In some cases, I have producers or agents that come in and say, "Hey, I'm going out to see a guy that does this, or I'm going out to see an account that does this. What should I bring up? Do you have any claim scenarios? Do you have any?" So that is a lot of times the kind of ammunition that helps sell. But I think it's the education, in addition to the claim scenarios, the education that coverage is not included in the regular insurance program. I think that's the big thing, is that making sure that they understand that there are gaps in the coverage relative to environmental. I think so. It's a combination of both. But when it comes to claim scenario, you brought up auto dealers, auto shops. I have a lot of those that I work with, but there are, the situations, whether it's a storage tank, a fuel storage tank, whether it's the body shop, whether it's, the neighbor at a strip mall facility that says that they're washing stuff onto their property, there are examples out there. And I think that, if any producer or salesperson takes the opportunity to look at the resources from the carrier's perspective, the environmental carriers, they can get their hands on some really good ones to arm themselves when they go in.
All right, let's talk about your interactions with agents. What are when an agent approaches you with an environmental risk, what information do you wish that they always came to you with, but they almost never do? Like where do producers commonly fall short in getting you a complete submission or all the information that you need?
So I bring up the fact that a lot of times I get an email, a text, a phone call that says, "Hey, I need some environmental coverage for my client." And that's it, right? Well, first things first, I want to understand, well, what does that client do? Because, or that insured do? Because what are we talking about? A site? Are we talking about contracting operations? Are we talking about transportation? A lot of times, or I've got a contract that says my client needs environmental coverage. We need to get a policy in place quickly. Well, the first thing that I always need to understand is, as well as any underwriter, is, well, what are they doing? Is it even a relevant request, right, for what they're doing? But um, that's the first thing. I always like to get my hands on the standard casualty application, the general liability stuff. How many locations do they have? Statement of values. What's going on all their properties? What are their operations? A lot of times I'll have a big account and they'll say, we do a lot of contracting. Well, okay, that's great. But tell me, I mean, is it X percent plumbing, X percent electrical, X percent you go to a carrier with that kind of information, unless you can divvy it up or break out the revenues based on the operations, you're going to run into a situation where they're going to lump it all into the highest category, right? So we don't want that. But that's that. I think when someone comes to me with a submission, my first thing is understanding, well, what they're doing. And then understanding, I always say, well, who is the carrier on the general liability and who's the carrier on the pollution? And the reason I ask is that you've got a lot of those carriers that also offer environmental coverage, right? And because at a carrier you've got your siloed towers, right? Your general liability underwriter doesn't talk to your property underwriter. A lot of times they're not rounding out coverage internally. So I
Hmm.
always like to understand it. Well, is there an opportunity here for the general liability carrier to share underwriting information internally and get a pollution quote? I like to build on those relationships. I think that the carriers appreciate that as well. Uh, but understanding, getting a copy, what I try not to do is to bombard someone with an application. Oh my gosh, we can't do anything till you fill out the 6-page environmental application, because the environmental carriers in most cases are going to want their own application completed and signed prior to binding, right? So a lot of times I'll say, just fill out some basic information about your account, but let's look at the general liability submission. Let's look at the property submission. Let's look at the information that we've got, your general liability losses, your property. Let's look at what we've got on the account before we start filling out the environmental applications so that we can get an idea of what's needed. So I think, to answer your question a little more succinctly, is it depends on the risk, because sometimes with a good conversation and a copy of a standard casualty application, I can put enough information together to start the submission and the underwriting process. A lot of times insureds shy away from it because they think, oh gosh, that's too much work. Too much work. I don't want to have to fill out a sixth application. I'm already filling out my, app, my cyber app. So I don't want to overwhelm someone with that. I think the biggest thing I like when producers and sales staff comes to me, or account executives, just tell me what you know about the account. Tell me what you know about what they do. Do they sub out anything? Are they a manufacturer and a distributor? Are they just a distributor? Do they own or lease their properties? Has there been any environmental complaints? The environmental underwriting market can access publicly available information to get an idea if there's issues on properties based on addresses. But when it comes down to it, when you go to the insured and say, do you have any environmental information? Do you have an environmental site assessment that was done on the property? It's important that there be open dialogue there, and that anything an insured or a producer knows about is disclosed to the carrier. So you think that someone's gonna be like, "Oh gosh, I don't wanna tell them that I had, an environmental issue or, 2 years ago. I don't wanna tell them that there wasn't a report that identified something from 5 years ago." That's not what you don't wanna put your head in the sand, and you don't wanna bury your head in the sand. You want to disclose that information because environmental policies have an exclusion in them that says that there's basically a prior knowledge non-disclosure exclusion. So if you know about something, you didn't disclose it prior to binding, they're going to exclude it anyway if there's a claim. So making sure that that information is shared is going to be key, and that's why a lot of times that carriers want their own applications because they use it as a warranty statement. Do you know of anything that could give rise to a claim? That's going to be something that's key. Um, so there's a lot. It's not as overwhelming as it sounds when you're working with someone who knows what to ask, I guess is the way to look at it, right? Um, it shouldn't be a daunting task.
No worries. From an underwriter perspective, and this just shows how little I know about environmental. How is the rating actually, factored? Is it more like, obviously it can't be completely formula driven like a work comp. It's got to be judgment related, So like, how does the rating typically work?
That's a good question. I get that a lot. A lot of times I ask, I have insurers that ask for ballpark premiums or how's it going to be rated. But when you're looking at a site, a piece of property or a portfolio of properties, that's going to be underwritten based on the property itself. So, what's going on the property? What's the history of the property? Where is it located? Sometimes, a lot of people would assume that, oh gosh, if I've got 1,000-acre piece of property, am I going to pay 1,000 times more than someone who has a 1-acre piece of property? That's not necessarily the case. I've seen 1-acre pieces of property generate a lot more premium based on what's going on in that 1 acre
Hmm.
or the history of that 1 acre. So site specific is underwritten based on the property and the information about the property that you can get access to. Um, Contractors pollution liability is usually rated based on revenues, the revenues of a job, the revenues of a project, the revenues of all the contracting operations, and then experience. They're gonna wanna, understand the experience of that contractor. How many jobs are they doing? How big of jobs are they doing? But there's usually there's a revenue component there uh, when it comes to rating. Transportation, number of units that are transporting, what's being transported, similar to auto liability. How far are they going? What's the radius? Things like that. What kind of safeguards do they have in place? Whether it's CDL licenses and they understand hazmat transportation or um, things like that. So the rating can be very arbitrary. It's not like there are not filed rates. So you're talking when you talk about environmental coverage, 95% of environmental coverage is written on non-admitted paper, right? It's excess and surplus lines. And so what that means is the forms and the rates are not filed with the regulator. So underwriters have the ability to price and rate things how they want. But there is consistency in the market. When I send a risk out
Hmm.
to, 5 different carriers, the premiums usually come back in the same range. What I see different many times is the limit, the deductible, the extent of coverage that they're offering. So that's where there's more of a difference. All of my contractors' pollution liabilities could come back. The premium can come back all, between $2,500 and $3,500, right? For a small contractor. One's quoting claims made, one's quoting occurrence, one's got a $5,000 deductible, one's got a $25,000 deductible. So you kind of got to look at the different terms and conditions. But it is not an easy thing to say that you've got this rate for this operation or, this when it comes to environmental. It's a little bit more arbitrary and a little bit more um, based on more factors than just revenue, just payroll, just number of locations. There's a lot more that goes into it.
Can we talk? One of the things I asked Micah before I called you is he said, ask her about sudden and accidental versus gradual.
Okay, that's a good
Can
one.
we talk? Can
Absolutely.
you explain that to me like I'm five?
Sure. So sudden and accidental. So when you're talking about a pollution incident or a pollution release, and you say, well, we've got coverage for sudden and accidental pollution conditions, that means that you saw it happen, you know when it happened, and you know when it started, and you know when it stopped. Sudden and accidental. So some carriers include what I would say an S&A component in their policy. Once in a blue moon, you'll see a GL carrier that throws it in there that gives you 72 hours, meaning the pollution incident had to have occurred, been discovered, and reported to the carrier within 72 hours. So that's sudden and accidental. Now, it may or may not be adequate for what you're doing. If you're only worried about there being a release, and you would at all times have your eyes on it and know when it occurred and be able to report it to the carrier, sudden and accidental may be adequate. 72 hours is kind of pushing it, but there are carriers that will offer something like a 10-day discovery and a 20-day reporting period, or a 15-day discovery, 30-day reporting, right? So you do have some leeway there for something that would be considered sudden and accidental. But what sudden and accidental definitely is not going to cover is something that may already be there or pre-existing, because you have to know when it commenced, when it started, and you have to report it within that time period. So that's your sudden and accidental component. Gradual coverage means, it gives you the coverage for something that may be leaking over time, but you're not aware that it's leaking. Or it may be in the soil, or it may be going in the air from a certain period of time. You don't know when it started. It's been going on for, you know, as long as you've been at the facility. Uh, that's your gradual component, where there's not that time restriction as to when should be discovered and reported to the carrier. So the gradual is obviously the broader coverage because it doesn't um, put that limitation on there. But your S&A coverage in some cases could be adequate if you're only worried about what you're doing today going forward, and it would be possible, and that for you to put a timeline on it when it commenced and was reported to the carrier. So that's going to be the big difference between the two.
Do you find which seems to be bigger typically, like the remediation cost of things or the third party liability part of it? Or is it
Well,
depends on the risk?
it depends on what the contamination is. Um, so if you've got something that's in the air or the groundwater, and it's affecting a large number of third parties, and you've got potentially a class action lawsuit, and you've got allegedly, harming a large number of people, your third party claim there could be much more expensive than the cost to remediate or address the release. But if you've got a contamination that you're cleaning up, like in the soil or the groundwater, you've got existing contamination, and you're currently doing a remediation, having to remediate even a little bit more, let's say another foot of soil, it can increase the cost of that cleanup exponentially. So it does depend on what the contaminant is and what the claim is, which one's going to be more expensive. Uh, I've seen very, very large claims for cleanup, and I've seen very, very large claims for third party bodily injury, class action lawsuits where there's, significant defense costs. That's one thing you need to take into account too with the third party is the defense costs. If you've got a remediation, typically there's not, you know about what needs to be cleaned up. Your regulators told you what needs to be cleaned up. You don't maybe necessarily have to defend yourself there, but those third party claims, there's the defense cost component.
What did I not ask you about that I should have asked you about? Like, what are some keystones of environmental that we need to know that maybe we haven't touched on yet?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I feel like we've talked about a lot, and I've talked a lot for 53 minutes.
No,
So
you did great. So
I and
yeah,
I don't want to overwhelm or get off on a tangent, because there's just so much that can be shared.
yeah,
When you again, I'm sure you've talked with a lot of people. So when you're talking with someone that's passionate, it's been doing something for a long time, I feel
totally.
like it's all in my head, and I wish I could just share it
Hmm.
all. Uh, but it is a learning process, and it's not something that's going to be, you're not going to be able to listen to my podcast and read a book, or look online one time and understand what needs to be. There's a learning process there, but there's a lot of opportunity. And way I look at it is, it's not going away. It's definitely not going to go away. I mean, we have changes in our administration, or our presidents, and how they look at environmental issues, and how regulators, look at things. Our society is becoming more and more litigious. That's something that we can't control. Uh, there's a lot of development going on. I mean, I live in near Cleveland, Ohio, right? So I like to tell people that, gosh, if they didn't develop on dirty properties around me, nothing would get done. It's a very, it's not like your coast in California, or down in Florida. I mean, there's a lot of development that goes on around me on a daily basis, that's on property that has very, very colorful history. You don't know what exactly happened on that property 50, 75 years ago. Uh, that's something that, as that changes as well. As the economy becomes better, more development, more mergers and acquisitions, companies are acquiring other companies. They may or may not know the full history of what that company did. So that's something that we didn't really touch on, is, the merger and acquisition, acquiring a property, acquiring a site, what kind of due diligence is being done,
Hmm.
acquiring a business or a division of a business. you know that's another, a lot of times you have M&A companies and M&A firms that look at the history based on employees, lawsuits, products liability, but the environmental liability component, it's a little bit outside of the box. You have to look at other resources to be able to determine if the firm you're acquiring, do they have an exposure? Do they have a history? Do we know what was happening at these sites, for the last 20 years? Are we buying something or acquiring something that could cause an issue in the future? So
That's great.
yeah, that's where I see, I don't, like I said, I don't see environmental insurance going away. If anything, I'm seeing it purchased more and more commonly as a part of the regular insurance program, part of your annual stewardship program. When you look at, the other renewals, environmental coverage should come up, and it should be discussed every time.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how dumb were my questions? Was it, what did I seem like I reasonably knew enough to ask to moderate an interview?
Absolutely. I mean, your questions were not dumb at all. They're actually questions that I get asked. I mean, I've gotten asked on many, many a time.
All right.
It,
I'll take
it's
that as a
not.
win.
No, I do. I appreciate it, and, like, I appreciate the opportunity to just share and to talk, and um, to educate. So,
If
thank.
Anya, thanks so much. We had to reschedule at least once, I think maybe twice. So I appreciate your patience and thanks for hanging in there. And you did great. So awesome podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care, Trey.
All right, see you.
Bye bye.